just to show how many cigarette butts we pick up on Polk Street. It was a bag with, I want to say, like 8,000 cigarette butts that we picked up over the course of not a long time. I don't remember anymore whether it was a couple of weeks or like a couple of months.
All right, y'all. Hey, welcome to another episode of Story of a Startup. Today, Jessica and I have Amin Israfil with us, one of the founders of Rubbish, which is an amazing sustainability company focused on creating AI solutions for litter and imagining a world where we don't take litter for granted. But I want to make sure that I have those concepts correct, Amin. So, well, first of all, welcome to our show. So happy to have you on.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Yeah, that's a good start. And actually, that's where we started as a company with litter and environmental data. But since then, that was in 2017. So since then, we've kind of expanded beyond just litter to larger waste management sustainability ecosystem. So at Rubbish, we say that we're building the modern operating system for waste management. And as part of that, we're bringing in a lot of AI tools and new technology into the field for residents, companies, governments, all to be able to use this one ecosystem that we're building.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the vision. I love how transformative it could be, especially as you all start to scale. And one thing, when I was talking to Jessica about what really inspired me about your story, and like part of the reason I think was great to have you on our show is kind of that founding moment that you and your partner had in the streets of New York City. I'd love if you could take us through that and how that kind of sparked a sea change for you, like what you were doing at the time and then how that led into what you're doing now.
Yeah, of course. Happy to talk about it. So my partner and I, or co-founder and I, grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in Bay Ridge specifically, so kind of second to last stop on the R train. And even though we weren't living there at the time, I think it was the holidays and we were visiting family, and we were walking our pet corgi, Larson, who at the time was a couple of months old, and we were walking him on the streets where we grew up. And when we looked away for 1 second, he found the biggest, grossest, nastiest chicken bone you could imagine, started chowing down on it, was so excited by it that he started choking on it. He ended up being fine. He was like, oh my God, where can I get more chicken? But we were like, this sucks for a lot of reasons. Now, what do I have to do with this dog? Get him away for the chicken, number one. But also, this is the neighborhood where we grew up, and we felt like it sparked a conversation that it feels like it's getting dirtier. The parks are becoming more dirty. There's more hazards, chicken bones and other plastic bags and other pollution. And when we looked into it, we couldn't find much information. We couldn't confirm, is the neighborhood getting dirtier? Is it getting cleaner? What parks can we go to where this wouldn't be an issue? So whether we look for the data or we look for ways to resolve it, we weren't coming up with much. So that's why in 2017, we kind of set up Rubbish with the initial goal of cleaning up our neighborhoods. So I like to say that on that day, I became a full-time garbage man, previously an engineer. But now, fell down a kind of 7-year litter waste management rabbit hole that we continue to be in.
And take us back a little bit to what you were doing before you had the chicken bone incident. And were you always an entrepreneur in spirit, or had you started other things? I read a little bit about it, but I want you to tell us.
Sure. Let me start at the beginning. I grew up, I guess this isn't that uncommon anymore, but I grew up with computers, learning my alphabet on an old laptop that my dad had, but it was pre-Windows 95. He would write in, A : / Indiana Jones.exe. So I grew up loving computers and programming, and I did it as a hobby for a long time. Would make Flash video games and ZZT games and stuff like that. But in college, I decided I don't want to be by a computer all day. So I studied molecular bio and genetics. thinking I'm going to go either do research or go into medicine. And then, I finished college or, did well. And I said, sorry, mom and dad, I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm actually going to move to Australia, keep studying, and take classes that aren't on Friday or anything before noon. Um, so I
Sounds
ended up
like the
taking
dream.
yeah, it was, I still had scholarships, so it was great. I learned how to surf very poorly. I didn't have long hair at the time. That's more of a California transition. But there, I took some classes that were pretty transformative, even though all they had to do was fall into those two criteria. One of which was risk management in the School of Construction. My friend recommended it to me. I was like, all right, that sounds good. And it really changed the way I look. I look about creating businesses and kind of in life in general. Uh, but while I was in Australia, I needed a job. My schooling was done, so I was like, all right, what can I do with a student visa? So I ended up trying to. I could pick watermelons. I'm like, all right, I probably don't want to do that. And then I could be a waiter. I was like, all right, being a waiter sounds fun. I'm social. I'll get to talk to people. I was a waiter for one day. I was like, all right, I'm not a great waiter. I need to find something else. So I sold women's makeup door to door for months in the
Oh my
heat in
gosh.
Australia, and that ended up being also a very transformative experience because 20 years or not 20 years, like 10 years later, when I had to knock on all these people's doors and saying, hey, I'll clean shit up off your street or clean up the litter, just pay into this like $20 a month or whatever it is fund. Then it kind of broke down that barrier of approaching people and talking to people. Um, so I did that for a while. And then I moved to China. After that, my friend said, China's awesome, come to China. So I ended up from 2 weeks staying 1 year. I taught English and tutored in science for kids who want to study in the States. And then I came back after a year. I came back to New York. I worked in advertising and branding with TBWA, some pretty big agencies, and did that for a while. And did a bunch of consulting as well. We did a lot of work with governments. That ended up. I was like, all right, that was good experience, but not what I want to do. And one of the companies I worked for shut down, so I used the opportunity to go to South America. Ended up joining a Jane Goodall-backed NGO that worked to an animal sanctuary in Bolivia. So I worked in the jungle with a cat. Worked with you get one animal that you work with that you kind of assign to them. The goal is to re-release them into the wild when possible. So they had monkeys, they had birds, different kinds of cats. I worked with a 2-year-old puma named Carlos. He had a twin brother named Juan. Um, and when I wasn't doing that, I was mixing cement to build a brick shit house in the Amazon too, because you have to do physical labor too. So after a couple of months of that,
In the heat.
in the heat, yep, tons of mosquitoes. If you work with the animals, you can't wear mosquito repellent because they're allergic to it. Anyway, I ended up getting injured, coming back to the U.S. I'm like, all right, well, probably that's not a long-term job. So I went back to my original passion that I brought up, which was engineering, programming. I'm like, all right, maybe I can't stay in front of a computer all day. And then became a self-taught programmer, worked back in advertising for 6 months before starting my own company for mobile development. And we did a lot of work with pharma and travel. So like JetBlue, Gilead, Pfizer. So a lot of like high quality mobile applications for consumer. So that's kind of all the culmination of all those things, the branding, the sustainability, the engineering, mobile development. I view kind of Rubbish as a culmination of that. One of the first products we released was a user-friendly, nicely branded app with the goal of kind of changing the way that people look at litter, make it a more engaging process. And instead of constantly using like green and an earth and a plant symbol as everyone's logo, we want to make it like cooler and use like hot pink and do different kind of imagery.
I love the name too. It's
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Yeah,
we
it's
lean
like
into
it's like
that.
makes it kind of fun and like, but it's just yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and then rubbish. That was the culmination.
And then Larson and the infamous chicken bone, which I can definitely empathize with for as a dog owner who lives in a construction site right now because out at the farm there's lots of projects going on. Our workers who are really amazing and kind, they'll leave their lunch unfortunately out, and as you all know, chicken bones can shatter
They
as the
are,
dogs eat them, and very dangerous.
yeah.
Well, that's amazing. And, as you said, like rubbish is the culmination of a lot of your life experiences. But one thing that I heard and picked up on, and it's true for ourselves and other entrepreneurs we talk to, is it seems to be a bit of a kind of a restlessness of a spirit, wanting to have a lot of different experiences, always looking for the next problem to solve. So I just want to say that that's wonderful. And even as you started rubbish, and I know you created this great user friendly app, and an app I have on my phone and I'll use, but then you're like, well, I can do even more with this. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about like the core functionalities of the app you created, like the gamification pieces, and then how you're using that that back end for more projects that you're doing with like a city or a corporation to create a custom or tailored solution for them, because I thought those were really interesting as well.
Right on, yeah. Yeah, my parents would definitely agree with the restlessness comment. I definitely inherited that from someone. But yeah, so a couple of years ago, we switched from just focusing on litter, because our clients were asking us, hey, you're doing this tracking of environmental data and what's it called? Infrastructure.
Yep.
But can you use these kind of tools for AI for inside the trash can and out and these other places? And at the time, for a long time, it was very difficult. Like short of investing lots of time and money into developing these new models, it just wasn't possible. But then, as the landscape just changed. The tech landscape changed 2 years ago, where with the new LLMs, the language models, and the multimodal language models that just unlock so many new possibilities, that finally these things that we were being asked for like several years, it's like, oh man, we could do this. So we just started slowly building out these new features. And a lot of the stuff we do is very niche. And a lot of people don't think about because, they don't have to deal with disposing, 10 tons of trash every day. But those who do, large properties, cities, stadiums, university, all have these same problems. So to give you a couple of examples, we just started working with the city of New Orleans and the convention center, which is one of the largest buildings in America. That's 3 million square feet. That's more than the office space of the Empire State Building. The front of their building is 1 kilometer, and they're giant. So as you can imagine, they have all these waste containers that they want to not ship empty containers. They don't want to contaminate it. They want to make sure recycling is in the recycling, that there isn't compost. One, to make sure that they're doing the right thing, but B, because they don't want to spend money needlessly shipping empty containers and getting fined for contamination. So what we developed with them is the same way our app can take photos and track the presence of litter or environmental damage. We used it and we created special AI to be able to take a photo of the container, characterize what's in it, detect hazards, detect fullness, and then automate all that reporting. So they're no longer shipping empty containers. There's less contamination. And the coolest part of that is now, as part of the services that they're offering to their clients, which are the people who book the conference center, they can offer better sustainability metrics. So they could say, "Hey, look at how sustainable we're being. We're composting correctly. We're sorting your trash after all this bit after this big show." So it's useful for convention centers, but that same technology could be used by cities, haulers, and so on. I could give you one or two more examples, one of which is with Replate, which is one of the largest food recovery orgs. So what they do is in places like California that just passed a law called SB 1383 that basically says, hey, if you're a large venue like a stadium or Google Office and you have all this unused food, you can't just throw it in the trash. If it's, been eaten, you got to put it in the compost. Otherwise, you get a big fine. But if it's edible and can be repackaged to other people, you have to donate it. So we work with Replay to use our app to help facilitate the logistics. And one of the big problems that they were having is having all these runners who are basically similar to DoorDash employees fill out these forms, like how many, boxes of cabbage and, that did you pick up, and salads. So instead of having to fill that all manually with our app, you take a photo of what you're about to pick up and it categorizes it. And if it looks good, you press the thumbs up button. If not, you could just edit it. And it's been a huge efficiency gain for them. So instead of spending, 5 minutes and needing specialty hardware like scales to fill this stuff out, you just take a photo and you get the metrics that way. So we're just continuing to build out this ecosystem of products so that when a stadium, a large property, or a hauler or city comes to us with trash needs, we're like, all right, which ones do you want? And we can enable different modules so they could have just one app for them all.
One app to take care of all the needs for sustainability or, waste management. And as you said, I guess you're building that, like the future of, what was it? I love that term you used. Was it like the infrastructure for the future of waste management, something along those lines?
Yeah, we call it the operating system for waste management, a modern operating system for waste management. So just like with Windows or Mac, you could do all these cool things, but you're probably not doing everything. But having one, whether you Windows, Mac, or Linux, one place will probably serve all your needs, which if you decide to use it.
So I wanted to you're talking about one of the state bills that the California passed with reclaiming food waste. But of course, the way that you and I met was through Heidi Sambord's National Sustainable Action Committee group for CASB 54, which, for our listeners who aren't familiar with it, basically was passed by California in 2022, requiring that by the year 2032, 100% of all single-use packaging or food packaging had to be either compostable or recyclable, and then amongst some other regulations to make that happen. And I mean, it's pretty amazing in terms of, for your business, all of this new policy coming into place, new regulations that are requiring private companies to change the way that they're acting or their reporting and things like that. Have you found a good kind of partnership with both private and public entities in terms of what you're able to create? And do you find yourself at when they're drafting these types of regulations, like at a seat of the table, telling them kind of like what's possible to track and things like that? How has that evolved over the years?
Yeah, like you said, SB 54 is huge. And yeah, the system that we inadvertently built, or not, that we first built for litter and identifying litter, can also just as easily be used to kind of identify the brands that are in the waste stream that are being found either on the American River or just in the improper place. So that's definitely important to us. And one thing that we see as a big value that we could add to the community, being able to identify what the pollution is, the plastic, the brands, and all that to keep everyone accountable. To your question about partnerships, so we're huge on partnerships. So we would not be in the food recovery business if not for our partnership with Replate. So what we're really experts at is technology, but what they're great at is food recovery. So we form a partnership. They know everything there is to know about recovering food effectively, making sure it gets to the right places. And then we come in and we're like, all right, show us your process. This is how we could make it automated and make it better. So it's really about the convergence of those two skills. Partnership is huge. As part of that, giving talks is important. Like I actually just talked to Heidi's team. There's so many acronyms. It's NSAC,
you nailed it. Yeah.
All right.
National Sustainability Action committee
Committee.
or
Yeah. Okay.
council.
Cool.
There's
Yeah.
one of those C's. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Exactly.
Acronyms are endemic, especially like in the modern economy. There's an acronym for everything, it seems like.
Yeah, and a lot of them are like so close. There's like the zero waste conference, zero waste associate, or like all these like. So they say everything has like zero waste in it, just in different. uh,
Formulation.
anyway, what your other question was? Yes, partnerships important. Oh, and then policy.
Yep.
So we used to do more policy work. So we viewed the data as an extension, as a tool to change policy.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of examples of that. Some crazy things we did early on, which was we cleaned up our stretch of Polk Street in San Francisco. It was 8 blocks, about a half mile, give or take, and we did it 3 times per week. And we recorded every single piece of trash that we picked up along the way because we hooked up an automated like camera to the grabber that will just automate this logging. And we did that for a year. So we gathered over 100. It's like at the time, and I think still is, the largest litter study of its kind, like a continual change.
And Polk Street has a lot of trash. As someone, I was born.
Polk Street's got some trash.
Born in San Francisco, grew up in the Bay Area.
San Francisco has some trash.
Yeah, very familiar.
Yeah, yeah. It was good. It was good pickings.
So who did that? Like you were out there, or okay,
well, yeah,
your team?
I did with my partner, and that was our initial business model, which was to kind of ask the community to pay for these cleanups, and in exchange, we thought that data is important, so they knew that it was actually getting better, right? So like. Here, we'll create this map. We thought it would be a lot easier to create these maps and the data gathering would be true, but it turned out to be a bigger challenge, as all engineering efforts turned out to be. But we ended up getting there and building it. And it turned out most people, like it was a tough business to be in, right? Because you're knocking on all these doors and there's these mom and pop shops. No one wants shit and needles on their corner. So they'll be happy to pay $20 or $50. A lot of them would be. Some would be skeptical, reasonably, of the promise. But even if they wanted to pay, the turnover, selling to these small businesses is hard. It's $50 a month or whatever it is a lot to them. And even if they were enthusiastic, the restaurant business and these commercial corridors, as they are, turnover a lot. So even if you had big enthusiastic supporters, people move in and out, businesses closed, no fault of your own. So that ended up being difficult. And we realized that we were just, in a sense, recreating something that already exists, which is community benefit districts. So that's when we kind of shifted into thinking, all right, maybe we could be more about providing the data and tools for the people who are out there doing it anyway. But as part of that, when we gathered all that data, we did a couple of experiments. One early one is that we mapped out all the cigarette butts and the changes in cigarette butts. And we just kind of, without asking anyone, we just put a Rogue cigarette disposal, strapped it to a parking meter, and put them up where we thought they would be most effective. I think we only put up one. We expected it to be taken down the next day, but to our surprise, it was up for over 6 weeks before someone caught on and removed it. Some city official got it reported.
Who loves litter, right? A city official who was upset that you were putting on the streets.
Who loves cigarette butts on the ground.
But we kept measuring, and then what we found is that with that one cigarette disposal unit, we found I think it was like close to a 40% reduction in overall cigarette litter in that stretch, and that was great. So we were like telling everybody.
And you picked that location based off of where you had found the most amount of discarded before.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So we created like a heat map, and on the corner of Filbert and Polk, not too much. It's mostly residential, and then not surprisingly, outside of these two bars is like bright red. Yeah. So it's like, all right, let's put it in the hotspot, and that decreased cigarette litter quite effectively. So we tweeted about it, we blogged about it, we contacted everyone we could, like, look at this amazing data, look what we could do with data and public infrastructure. And they got like 80% of the point. So they were like, oh, great. So now let's put it, they put up in the same corridor five more or six more cigarette disposable units. And we're like, all right, not exactly the point we were trying to make, because they just put them up where it looked good, or like where they thought, like strapped to a light pole. But we were asked them like, hey, can we count the cigarettes that are going in here? We'll just extend our study. And they're like, sure, if you want to count cigarettes, here's the key. So we ended up maintaining them, and they were barely used. Their heart was in the right place, but those five additional cigarette disposal units barely made a dent in comparison to one that was placed with kind of data and informed by these kind of decisions. So not only are you really not making much of a difference, but you're kind of wasting money purchasing the disposal units, and then you have to service them. So, and it's literally just a waste of money. So we ended up doing more work. I would call it like in the policy area. We ended up working with UPenn on similar things. But a really long answer to your question. At a certain point, we realized like we can't be good at everything. Policy is so hard. And that's why you need people like Heidi, who are just like policy experts. So we were like, even if our policy ideas are well-intentioned, we might be wrong for reasons that we don't even understand, because we don't understand the domains well enough as much as people like Heidi. So then we actually shifted as a company to be like more policy agnostic. We are just a tool. We are like a microscope or an information gathering tool with the hope of providing these kind of objective stats and facts. So in support, and then scientists can use, and lobbyists and government officials can use our tools to inform their own policy. And we just kind of take a neutral, like if it's science and it's everything is back, GPS, photo, all that, then our tool, that's something our tool could be used for. I give you one or two examples of some big policy work that has been done using our tools, if you like.
That's pretty awesome. And it just seems to me that because there's the ROI, right, for sustainability laws or sustainable practices is not as, by definition, it's not going to provide as much, or it was just going to cost you a lot of money compared to like something that's just a pure business play, that efficiency and having good data, it becomes so much more important. So as someone who is really passionate about the environment, I'm really happy that tools like yours exist that enable, an environmental policy expert or people who want to advocate in favor of good practices. Like, hey, it's not going to require us to do 5 times the effort. If we do 1 times the effort, but do it correctly, we can have this big impact. And that's amazing. So I do want to hear about more policy stuff. I wanted to make sure, Jessica, if you had a question you wanted to get in as well.
No, at the moment I'm good. But yeah, this is fascinating to hear, just to hear the whole stories.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll give two.
Yeah, let's do it.
Give one or two more examples. Pause. Stop me anytime. I used to worry about being able to fill 10 minutes about like litter, and now I can just like talk forever and just tell me when to shut up.
What we've found, especially too, is that like almost the more nerdy, for lack of a better word, we can be about like specific topic areas, that's what people find really fascinating, right? It's like they want the deep dive. So
yeah, I'm a programmer, Garbageman. I can nerd out, no problem. So a great organization, it's kind of strange because you find that you're just trying to do a good thing with, in your business. But there's a lot of traps you could fall into, or like people that you could unintentionally offend, because some people might be very pro nuclear versus very anti. And like I'm just trying to do what's best. I'm not a nuclear expert, but it's like similar things with litter and resource recovery. One example of that is what my most controversial slide I put up. With our app, you could scan any item, and it'll tell you how to dispose of it according to local regulations. And it gives you a pretty great baseline. And then when communities want us to like really fine tune it, we'll engage with the government or the hauler to really take it from 85% or 90% to 99% to get those like edge cases. But one of the slides I put up was the black plastic slide, where I said, like, imagine taking a photo of a whole rotisserie chicken container that you bought from Safeway. Our app will tell you the paper is recyclable, the chicken is compost, and the black plastic, the container, is recyclable, but you have to wash it first. And I think a lot of people know that in most, that black plastic, whatever it is, doesn't get whatever number it is, I'm blanking, won't get recycled probably at the facility. But that's what Recology wants you to do in San Francisco. So that's just the information that we pass along to people, and that ended up being quite controversial.
So I just Googled it. Number 5. Does that sound right?
That's what I thought.
Okay.
Number 5. Yeah. I was afraid of saying the wrong. Anyway, I put that up. I'm like, I understand, like, that it's not actually recyclable, but that's what the city wants you to do, and that's our best North Star. And you can put an asterisk saying not actually recyclable, but put in the recycling anyway. Does that cause more harm than good? I don't know. Like, there's a whole infinite hole that you could just go down on each type of plastic, and what could be done with it. And we're like, all right, look, we just strive to do our best to be like an objective source of truth. If the city's official mandate says, or if you go on Recology and type in 94109, what do I do with this black plastic? And it says, put it in the recycling. That's the information that we will pass along. Anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent. As far as an example of our tools for policy work, a great example is the Moore Institute on plastic pollution and research. Oh, I remember why. Because they're not controversial. They're like one of the few, like, everyone loves working with them. And Wynn Calgar in particular does great work.
Also, by the way, I love that you moved to California and like got the beautiful flow, got the long hair.
Yeah.
As a Californian,
it took 5 years, but eventually, yeah.
Love to see it.
All right. Tori McGruer. So, Wynn Calgar and Tori McGruer and Macy Gustavus started this thing called No Trace Trails. So they're all scientists, environmental scientists. Wynn at the Moore Institute on Plastic Research. For lack of a better title, the preeminent litter and microplastics researcher, putting out work today. And what they did was do a 2,600-mile survey of litter and microplastics along the Pacific Crest Trail. So they literally walked from Mexico to Canada and did a survey of microplastics and litter along those trails. And we made customizations to the app to be able to support them. One of the big ones being offline mode. So to be able to take these surveys when there's no internet connection, sometimes for days, so that all the information will be saved locally and automatically uploaded when the internet is reconnected. So they ended up completing it last year. They walked all 2,600 miles and did the survey. And along the way, they did litter and microplastic samples. So I believe all that data is open. They're in the process of doing peer-reviewed research now and releasing it in the next, I want to say, like 12 months, so that other people could benefit from these studies. People could learn how to better take care of our natural trails, what trash is showing up. But also a big part of it is how is microplastics from our shoes, from our clothes, seeping into the environment, and what could be done to mitigate it. And all of us, love science and we love nature. The goal is, how do we preserve our natural environment, not to in any way restrict people from being out in it, but just to make it more sustainable and just study the effects of plastic, both inadvertent and sometimes purposeful pollution. So that's a big one that we did, and all open data. The conclusion, we provided the tools or the microscope. It's up to the scientists to kind of take that, translate it into research, communicate with government and private business. And we just want to be that kind of reliable tool that both businesses, researchers, and scientists could use for this kind of work.
Jessica, I feel
Yeah.
like you have something on the tip of your tongue.
I'm waiting because it's a little bit like sort of off topic, but not. Yeah, I mean it's crazy like how what you guys have been able to do, and that's so helpful, like you're saying, for like the different policy and like analyzing the data and things. And I guess my mind keeps wandering to, and you're probably like the best person to ask maybe, but like there's places in the world, I guess, cities that are kind of known to be cleaner than others, and there's dirtier cities and things like that. Like here, obviously we're talking about San Francisco has kind of a reputation at the moment for being sort of a dirtier city. LA obviously has a lot of trash, New York, that kind of thing. And then you hear people talk about like, oh, they were just in Tokyo or wherever, and it's like so clean. And so it makes me just wonder, like, what's happening before? Like, what's the reason why some places like culturally are more dirty with rubbish than others? And is that something that you guys have explored as well?
For sure, yeah, and a lot of people ask similar questions, and it's hard. There's no kind of one answer. It's kind of a problem with multiple inputs or vectors. So it's there isn't one reason why Japan and Tokyo is clean and San Francisco isn't. But I can speak to things that through either our research or casual or observation can speak to. One is infrastructure does matter, right? Having the proper infrastructure, whether it's trash cans available and emptied and not overflowing, can and will make a difference.
And obviously what we talked about, like what you guys are doing helps enable cities to make those better planning choices and having the better infrastructure.
Exactly. And there is a cultural and educational element to it as well. And education is big, and it's something that a lot of cities invest a lot of money into to educate people. Everything from signs and communications around illegal dumping, like, hey, you don't have to drive off into the forest and leave your mattresses there because you're afraid you're going to get a big bill. In fact, just come to, college or these drop-off sites. Or, I think San Rafael and some other cities have these designated dump days where they're like, just come, bring your bulky items, and we'll take care of them for you. So a good chunk of it is education, letting letting people know that they're not going to have to pay hundreds of dollars or whatever in fees if they bring it on these certain days. What else? There's a common thing, especially in San Francisco, is people end up blaming the unhoused and the homeless quite often. Which that is not to say that they never. It's not to say that isn't part of the problem, but one could look at what we did on Polk Street. So we did this for, I forget what year, it was like it was like pre-pandemic when we started, but let's just say 2019 to 2020, 1 year of data, half a mile, 3 times per week. So pretty clear trends. Some of those trends that we found is after a couple of weeks of regular cleanups, we found that the baseline litter actually stayed pretty low. And then you'd see a huge spike, I think one in November and one in October. Those days are SantaCon and Halloween. That you see one of the biggest spikes in litter. And then we saw, I don't know if you remember, but we had like these terrible fires that reduced the air quality really, really poorly for like almost a week or so, where they advised people from going outside. So really not a lot of people were outside. And what we found is that the litter, actually, that was probably the lowest it was. So all that is to say, people who just tend to blame the unhoused for all this trash on the street, well, they're probably not going to SantaCon and Halloween and causing all this litter. And they're still on the street when the air quality is bad. Therefore, it's unlikely that this is the main driver of why your streets are dirty. So that's one example.
It's interesting too that you noticed after some regular cleanup that the streets kind of maintained better, which I think totally makes sense, like psychologically for people. I think when there's like a pile of trash, like you're not as worried about, not that I do it, but like tossing like something into the pile as well because it's just there. But when it's like clean and nice, you take more pride basically, and you don't want to make it dirty.
I feel like, and you see that with cigarettes, kind of especially, where they just tend to cluster. And if you see like this one tree well full of cigarettes, it's probably going to attract more cigarettes. In a previous life, I was a smoker, and one of my favorite parts was tossing the cigarette. So I feel like I'm kind of like paying penance for all that cigarette litter I caused. And I would never litter otherwise. I was a Boy Scout. I really cared about the environment, but for some reason, cigarette butts weren't part of this equation for me. Uh, but I feel like I've since then kind of made up for the amount that I've littered. I actually remember posting on social media one day of just to show how many cigarette butts we pick up on Polk Street. It was a bag with, I want to say, like 8,000 cigarette butts that we picked up over the course of not a long time. I don't remember anymore whether it was a couple of weeks or like a couple of months. I posted it on Reddit, and it became one of the most popular photos on Reddit on our picks of all time. Like it hit over 100,000 upvotes, thousands of comments. And that was a strange scenario to be in because one, like, people really resonated with like, look at, cleaning up the bay and all that stuff. But also it's just weird to have thousands of people comment on you and like, and then make like these kind of, it was kind of fun. They made these photoshops of me. Like at the time I had short hair. So they put me in like like trash store outfit. So it gave me long hair and this kind of Photoshop thing. That was fun, but that actually ended up with us on the news, which ended up, through the news, we got introduced to the former head of the EPA, Lisa Jackson, who at the time was at Apple. So they learned about what we were doing. So they were like, oh, like tell us more. And ended up forming an interesting and great relationship there to the point where like we've been at WWDC. We were one of the intro clips ahead of introducing Tim Cook and the new operating system. So that was very cool. And if you go on Apple's website homepage now, under the App Store, you'll see our icon, the rubbish icon between Snapchat and Marvel.
Wow.
Which is pretty cool.
That's really cool.
So you never know all the good things that could happen if you just clean up your streets.
Just pick up some trash. Yeah.
Just pick up some trash. You never know.
The good deeds follow.
Do some good deeds.
Mm-hmm.
So I found the Reddit post you just mentioned to me, and my favorite comment. I mean, I just I'm bad because I'm a multitasker, but was someone said you look like the extra Hemsworth brother.
That was one of the nicer things that that they said. My favorite was trash store, and they just kept going on like a pun chain of like son of custodian, and
oh, that's amazing.
I forget. That's as much as I remember, but it was fun.
Yeah. Well, that's great that you were able to, you mentioned, introduce Tim Cook, and you get the Rubbish app in the App Store. I mean, that's just great exposure and such a sign of a successful startup. I mean, like Apple in a lot of ways, I think in our culture really represents like the startup, especially, during Steve Jobs' tenure, that was always innovating and always coming up with something new and never really settling. So one question I definitely wanted to be able to ask you is really around, people are very passionate about sustainability. I think especially young people, and there's probably a big overlap in terms of that Venn diagram of people who are entrepreneurial and care about sustainability. So if you were giving advice to someone who is young and trying to figure out what to do with their life, who wanted to be involved in that intersection of sustainability and entrepreneurship, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think you could just do things. You could do whatever you want, especially if you're young. Like you don't need a degree in environmental, whatever. If you're passionate and you see a problem, you're just try and do things, whether it's like through starting a business or just a local composting, recycling, or whatever. Maybe you want to start a nuclear fusion startup, but you could just do those things. No one's going to stop you. All of them are going to be a lot of work, but try it. And every year it's easier and easier. You used to have to be like a really good programmer, and you still do in some ways to develop an iOS app. But the barrier to entry is just going down and down because of all these new tools like Claude and ChatGPT that you could use to kind of, if you suck at writing copy because your English isn't great, then well, good for you. You use ChatGPT to write your copy, and you could just focus on the programming, or vice versa. So you could just do things, and especially when you're young, just go out, make some mistakes, see what resonates. Um, and then if you're in San Francisco, there's a big community out here in New York as well. So lots of events, like they have Climate Week. And if you're living kind of in the Bay Area, I'm actually right here now at this place called 90. So the whole this wasn't planned, but they just gave me a T-shirt, so
Nice.
we'll get their brand out there. Where it's a whole community, kind of like a co-working space, but specifically for entrepreneurs and people involved in climate tech and sustainability. So that's the other part. Like, go out and do stuff, and then also get off don't spend all your time on the internet. Go meet other people who are working on these cool things. Um, but but yeah, I would say, especially when you're young, like do crazy stuff and travel and see how other communities do it, and take risks.
It's very great advice. And I know that there's, as you said, the barrier of entry is going down, and it makes me excited for all of the things that can be unleashed by the future of how technology is changing. Also a little nerve wracking, right? Because it's a bit of a Pandora's box, but I think since people are good, most of the fundamentally most of those outcomes will be very positive. At
Yep.
least that's my personal philosophy.
I agree. We survived, mobile. We survived the internet. We survived the printing press. This is just an extension of that continuing arc.
Yeah. What do you see as the future for your startup, or in your mind, since you have that uh, that restlessness of spirit, right? You're always kind of looking around, or other kind of like problems that you're really passionate about solving, that you're saying someone should go out there and tackle it, or something that you're excited to go and try to solve.
Yeah, for our startup in Rubbish, we just want to be the best at waste management. Like, just enable like those tools for cities, residents, haulers, everybody. Like, we're great engineers, we're great software developers, and we could work on this cool, important topic, and that could be our contribution for 10 years. Like, I'll be very happy spending my time and effort working on a problem like that. Not to say, increasing ads for, ad spend by 1%. That's important too. Like, companies need that. That's how, big companies are made. And that's important work too. But we just chose this like difficult problem that feels like it touches everyone on Earth. So if we nail it, if we do a good job, or even if we do like a pretty good job, the impact that we have can scale, or could be realized on a global basis.
That's awesome. Jessica, any final questions you wanted to ask Amin?
Uh, no, I don't think so. This has been really interesting. Thank you.
Well, Amin, anything that you wanted to make sure that you were able to talk about today, and pass on from your startup journey and your entrepreneurial past?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, both Dominic and Jessica, for having me on this podcast. It's a big honor to be able to share with you and your community. And so maybe another piece of advice that is relevant now. that I wish someone gave me earlier is that in addition to building cool stuff, you got to go out and tell people about it and talk about it. I think for the first part of our career, we did do some blogging, we did something like that, but kind of what brings me here today is just if you're building something and you're building either a software tool or a compost facility or org in your community, you got to go and talk to people and let people know about it. And giving talks is an important part of it. So, if you're listening to this podcast and you're working on something cool, definitely reach out to Dominic and Jessica and be like, hey, I'm working on this cool stuff. I would like to tell people about it.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, it's important. And you're right. Like it's not always intuitive to remember that you have to sort of like self-promote as you go. And there's a lot of things going on in the world. So you have to find a way to be heard and seen.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to knock on doors. I mean,
And sell makeup.
Sell shit cleaning services, whatever it is.
That's awesome. And yes, for everyone out there who's working on something, reach out to Jessica and I. We're definitely love talking to our community and being part of your community and sharing those stories and kind of growing together. Last thing that I kind of was really struck by, Amin, is the power of, really tackling your own karma. I know it was a little bit tongue in cheek, but you were like, the one litter I ever did was cigarette butts. And then you basically, by, paying back your own karma, were able to have all of this really amazing success in your life. And I think that's a really beautiful story. So I love the full circle and poetic element of that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I wonder what the next thing will be that I have to pay by.
Yeah, I'm keeping all mine locked up tight for the moment.
If you live long enough, there will be plenty more.
Yeah, sure. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Amin, and loved having you on, and can't wait for our paths to cross again. And when I'm back home in the Bay Area and schedule allows, definitely reach out and say hi.
Yeah, please. Let's next time either of you are in the Bay Area. I still live near Polk Street, so we could grab a beer or a coffee.
Beautiful.
Sounds amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you.